The silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance. Waiters gliding between tables, soft conversations about nothing important, the gentle clink of expensive silverware on expensive plates. Finally, Daniel pushed back his chair and stood. He looked at his parents, and something in his expression was different from when the evening had started. Clearer, maybe. More certain. "I think we should go," he said to me. I stood, smoothing my cheap dress. "The bill will be taken care of. Enjoy the rest of your evening." "Wait," Catherine said, reaching out as if to grab my arm, then thinking better of it. "Please. Can we start over?" I considered her for a moment, this woman who'd spent 2 hours explaining why I wasn't good enough, who was now realizing what she'd done. "Maybe," I said. "But not tonight. Tonight you should sit with what happened. Think about how it felt to be on the receiving end of your honesty." Daniel took my hand, and we walked toward the exit. Behind us, I heard Catherine's quiet sobs, Richard's low voice trying to comfort her. Marcus appeared from nowhere to open the door for us, his face carefully neutral though his eyes danced with suppressed amusement. "Good evening, Ms. Harrison," he said. "Mr. Chen." "Good evening, Marcus." The meal was exceptional, as always. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. Daniel and I walked half a block in silence before he stopped, pulling me around to face him. "That was incredible," he said. "And terrifying. And I have so many questions." "I know. Why didn't you tell me? About any of it, the restaurant, the test, what you were planning? Would you have let me do it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed a surprised, genuine sound. "No. Definitely not. I would have told them everything immediately, tried to make them see you the way I see you." "Exactly. But I needed them to see themselves first. To see what they become when they think no one's watching who matters." Daniel pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry they treated you that way. Don't be. They showed me who they are. Now the question is what you do with that information." "What I do?" He pulled back to look at me. "I already know what I do. I choose you. Every time. No question. Even if it means disappointing them. Even if it means Thanksgiving dinners that are awkward and tense. Even then." His voice was firm. "Though I have a feeling once the shock wears off, they're going to be falling over themselves to make this right." "Probably," I admitted. "But that's almost worse, isn't it? Kindness that only comes after they know your net worth." We started walking again, my hand in his, heading toward his car parked 3 blocks away. The city sounds surrounded us, traffic, distant sirens, the muffled bass from a bar on the corner. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said after a while. "Always. When you said your family has more money than mine, was that true?" I laughed. "Yes. My great-grandfather invented a component that's in basically every piece of electronics manufactured today. The patents alone generate about 40 million annually, and that's just the passive income. But I don't lead with that because I learned early that people treat you differently when they know. They become either obsequious or resentful. They stop seeing you and start seeing your bank account. Is that why you were vague when we first met? Why you never mentioned any of this?" "Partly. But also because I wanted you to fall in love with me, not with what I have. Does that make sense?" "Complete sense." He squeezed my hand. "For what it's worth, I fell in love with you when you spent 20 minutes arguing with me about the Oxford comma. Your net worth had nothing to do with it." We reached his car, but neither of us moved to get in. The moment felt suspended somehow, like we were standing at a crossroads even though we were just in a parking garage. "What happens now?" I asked. "With your parents, I mean." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think they'll apologize. Properly, I mean. My mom especially, she's probably horrified right now. My dad will take longer. Pride is a hell of a thing. And if they don't, if they can't get past how I embarrassed them, then that's their loss." His voice was certain. I meant what I said. I choose you. Not because of the restaurants or the foundation or any of that. Because of who you are when you're with me. Because you make me laugh. Because you're brilliant and kind and you see through bullshit with surgical precision. Even when the bullshit is coming from your parents. Especially then. I kissed him, there in the ugly fluorescent lighting of the parking garage, and it felt like something shifting into place. Like a decision being made, not just by him but by both of us together. Later, at his apartment, curled up on his couch with coffee neither of us was drinking, Daniel asked the question I'd been waiting for. Do you think I'm like them? Like my parents? No, I said immediately. You're nothing like them. You never once made me feel small. You've never judged me or anyone else based on surface things. That's why I love you. But I came from them. I was raised with the same values, the same worldview. And you rejected it. Maybe not consciously at first, but you did. You chose to see people differently. That doesn't come from nowhere, Daniel. That's who you are at your core. He was quiet for a long time, processing. They're going to want to see you again. To apologize. Are you going to let them? Eventually. But not right away. They need time to sit with this, to really think about what happened and why. How long? I don't know. As long as it takes for them to understand that I'm not interested in performing forgiveness just to make them comfortable. When they're ready to actually do the work of being better, then we'll talk. You're kind of scary, you know that? I laughed. Good. People should be a little scared of underestimating others. It keeps them honest. The next few weeks were interesting. Catherine called 3 times before I answered, leaving increasingly distraught voicemails. Richard sent a formal apology letter that read like it had been drafted by his lawyer, all careful language and no real emotion. I didn't respond to either of them. Daniel fielded their questions, their attempts to make things right, their gradual understanding that throwing money or connections at the problem wouldn't solve it. I wasn't angry, exactly. I was just waiting to see if they could learn something from the experience or if they'd simply adjust their surface behavior while keeping their essential worldview intact. The gala came and went. They attended, of course they did, and were perfectly polite from a distance. I watched them watching me, seeing me in my element, meeting senators and CEOs and artists with the same ease they'd assumed I couldn't possess. I saw the calculations happening behind their eyes. A month after the dinner, Catherine asked to meet me alone. We chose a coffee shop in a neighborhood I liked, nowhere fancy, nowhere that required a performance. She looked older than she had at the restaurant, or maybe just more human. Her makeup was lighter, her outfit less aggressively designer. She ordered a regular coffee, not some complicated drink that announced status. Thank you for meeting me, she said when we sat down. Of course. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About that night. About the things I said and the way I made you feel. I waited, watching her gather her courage. I was wrong, she said finally. Not just in what I said, but in how I approached the entire evening. I looked at you and I saw someone who didn't fit my picture of what Daniel's partner should be, and I never bothered to look deeper. I never gave you a chance. Why? I asked. What made you so sure I wasn't right for him? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. Fear, I think. Fear that he'd choose someone who would take him away from us, from the life we'd built. Fear that we'd lose him to someone we couldn't control. Control? Influence, then. Understand. Someone who didn't fit into our world, who might pull him into a different one where we didn't have a place. She looked up at me, and I saw real pain in her eyes. I've spent my whole life in a very particular bubble. Everyone I know comes from the same background, went to the same schools, believes the same things about how the world works. And anyone who doesn't fit that mold feels threatening. Even though you don't know them. Especially because I don't know them. At least if I know someone's pedigree, I can predict how they'll behave. You were unknown. That made you dangerous. It was, I had to admit, the most honest thing she'd said to me. So what changed? I asked. Besides finding out I have money. That's not, she started, then stopped. Okay, yes, finding out about your background shifted something. Made me realize how badly I'd misjudged. But more than that, watching you at the gala, seeing how people responded to you, seeing the work your foundation does, I realized I'd been measuring you against the wrong standards. The work matters more than the bank account. Yes. And the way you carry yourself, the way you treat people, there's a grace to it that has nothing to do with breeding or education. Daniel sees that. I was too blind to see it. I took a sip of my coffee, letting her words settle. I appreciate you saying that. But I need you to understand something. I didn't test you that night to be cruel or to humiliate you. I did it because I've learned that people show you who they really are when they think there are no consequences. And the way you treated someone you thought had nothing to offer told me everything I needed to know about your values. We failed, she said quietly. Spectacularly. Can we try again? I studied her, this woman who was so different from how she'd been at dinner, who'd somehow found humility in the wreckage of her assumptions. Maybe. But it has to be real, Catherine. Not performance. Not trying to get back in Daniel's good graces. Real change in how you see people, all people, not just the ones who matter according to your old standards. I understand. Do you? Because it's easy to say that now, when you're trying to make amends. But the test is in the day-to-day. How you treat the receptionist at Daniel's building. How you speak to waiters. How you respond to people who actually can't do anything for you. She nodded slowly. You're right. And I can't promise I'll be perfect at it. But I can promise I'll try. That I'll catch myself when I'm falling into old patterns. That I'll do better. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A starting point, at least. Then let's try, I said. Slowly. No pressure. Just, let's see if we can build something real instead of something based on assumptions and fear. Her smile was tentative but genuine. Thank you. That's more grace than I deserve. Maybe. But grace is something we give people even when they don't deserve it. That's what makes it grace. We talked for another hour, about nothing important, the weather, a book she was reading, a charity she was considering for her board work. Small talk, but the kind that builds bridges instead of maintaining walls. When I left, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it, which was more than I'd had before. Daniel was waiting at my apartment when I got home, sprawled on my couch with a brief in one hand and his glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up when I came in, and his smile was worth everything. How did it go? Better than expected. Worse than ideal. Somewhere in the middle where real things live. He set down the brief and pulled me onto the couch beside him. That's good, right? It's a start. And with my dad. Still working on it. He's finding the humble pie harder to swallow. Daniel laughed. Yeah, that sounds about right. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, his arm around my shoulders, my head on his chest. Outside my window, the city hummed with its usual evening energy. I've been thinking about that night, Daniel said eventually. About what you did. Regretting dating someone who tests your parents. God, no. The opposite, actually. I've been thinking about how brave it was. To walk into that situation knowing you'd be judged, knowing you'd hear ugly things about yourself, and choosing to do it anyway just to learn the truth. It didn't feel brave at the time. Just necessary. That's what bravery is, though. Doing the necessary thing even when it's hard. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. You're remarkable, you know that. I'm practical. There's a difference. No, you're remarkable. You saw a problem, how to know if my parents would respect you for who you are versus what you have, and you found a solution. Most people would have just hoped for the best or tried to impress them. You went right to the heart of it. And now we know. The question is whether knowing changes anything. It changes everything, he said firmly. Because now there's no pretending. No polite fictions. They know who you are, and more importantly, they know who they were. That's harder to live with than any amount of money or status. I shifted to look at him properly. You're not angry that I put them through that? Should I be? Some people would be. Some people would say I was manipulative or cruel. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. If you'd done it to hurt them, maybe. But you didn't. You did it to see the truth. And the truth was ugly, but that's not your fault. That's on them. He paused. Besides, I think part of me always knew. I just didn't want to see it. Knew what? That they'd judge you. That they'd measure you against some invisible standard and find you wanting. I've watched them do it my whole life with other people, teachers, neighbors, anyone who didn't fit their mold. I just convinced myself it would be different with you because I love you. His voice went rough. I'm sorry I put you in that position. You didn't. I chose it. And I'd choose it again. Why? I sat up fully, turning to face him. Because I needed to know if this was going to work. Not just whether your parents would accept me, I honestly don't care that much about that, but whether you'd stand up for what matters when it got hard. Whether you'd choose people over pedigree. And you did. Of course I did. Not of course. Lots of people don't. They cave to family pressure or social expectations or just the path of least resistance. But you didn't. You walked out of that restaurant with me knowing it would complicate your life, knowing your parents would be hurt and angry. That told me everything I needed to know. Daniel pulled me close again, and I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek, steady and sure. I love you, he said. Not your money or your restaurants or your foundation. Just you. The person who argues about punctuation and tests my parents and sees through everyone's bullshit including mine. I love you too. Even though you leave wet towels on the bathroom floor and can't cook anything more complicated than toast. Hey, I made eggs last week. You burned eggs last week. There's a difference. We dissolved into laughter, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. This was what mattered, not the performance at the restaurant, not his parents' approval or disapproval, but this. Two people who saw each other clearly and chose each other anyway. 3 months later, I found myself back at Celestine, this time with both sets of parents. My mother and father had flown in from their winter home in Tuscany. Curious to meet the family their daughter had so thoroughly unsettled. I'd briefed them beforehand, of course. Told them about the test, about what had happened, about Catherine's slow journey toward understanding and Richard's more grudging acceptance. My mother had laughed until she cried. Oh, honey, she'd said, wiping her eyes. That's exactly what I did to your father's parents. Though I pretended to be rich when I was actually poor. Same principle, opposite direction. And it worked. Eventually. Your grandmother came around. Your grandfather never quite forgave me, but he respected me. Sometimes that's more important. Now, watching my elegant mother charm Catherine while my father engaged Richard in a surprisingly genuine conversation about market trends, I felt something settle in my chest. Not quite peace, too much had happened for that, but possibility. The possibility that families could evolve, that people could grow, that mistakes could be acknowledged and maybe, eventually, forgiven. Catherine caught my eye across the table and smiled. It was different from that first dinner, warmer, more real, with no calculation behind it. She'd been true to her word over the past months, catching herself when she made assumptions, asking questions instead of jumping to conclusions, treating my assistant with the same courtesy she'd show a CEO. Richard was harder to read. He'd apologized, formally and stiffly, but I sensed he still struggled with what had happened. Not because he thought he'd been right, but because being wrong, being so thoroughly wrong, challenged his fundamental understanding of how he moved through the world. That kind of revelation takes time to process. But he was trying. I'd seen him stop himself mid-sentence at Daniel's birthday dinner when he'd started to make a comment about someone's background. Watched him fumble for different words, better words. It wasn't elegant, but it was effort, and effort counted for something. Your daughter is something else, Catherine said to my mother, loud enough for me to hear. Daniel is lucky to have her. We're all lucky, my mother replied, her eyes twinkling. She keeps us honest. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, Squeezed gently. I squeezed back. The waiter appeared, Marcus again, who'd become something of a co-conspirator in the months since that first dinner. Ms. Harrison, your guests for the private room have arrived. I nodded. Thank you, Marcus. We'll join them shortly. Richard looked up, curious. Private room? For dessert, I said. I invited a few people I thought you should meet. I caught Daniel's eye and saw him fighting a smile. He knew what was coming. We moved to the private dining room, a smaller space with exposed brick and soft lighting. Waiting inside were 6 people I'd carefully selected, my foundation scholarship recipients, college students from backgrounds similar to what Catherine and Richard had assumed I had. First-generation students from small towns and big cities, working their way through school while maintaining perfect grades and building businesses and changing their communities. I watched Richard and Catherine's faces as I introduced them, watched the moment of recognition, the understanding of what I was doing. Not punishing them. Teaching them. Showing them the potential they'd almost dismissed, the brilliance that exists regardless of zip code or pedigree. The evening transformed. Catherine found herself deep in conversation with Maria, a pre-med student from rural Montana who was developing a telemedicine program for underserved areas. Richard listened with visible fascination as James explained his venture capital fund focused on businesses in food deserts. My parents watched it all with quiet satisfaction, occasionally meeting my eyes across the room with looks of pride. You're still testing them, Daniel whispered in my ear as we stood by the window. Watching his parents engage with people they might have dismissed 5 months ago. Not testing. Expanding. Same thing. Maybe, I conceded. But this time they're choosing to engage. That's the difference. And if they hadn't, if they'd been uncomfortable or dismissive, then we'd know. And we'd make decisions based on that knowledge. I turned to face him. But they're not. Look at your mom, she's genuinely interested in what Maria's saying. And your dad just laughed at something James said. Real laughter, not polite laughter. You did this, Daniel said softly. You created this opportunity for them to be better. I created the opportunity. They're choosing to take it. That's all we can ask for. As the evening wound down, Catherine pulled me aside near the coat check. Her eyes were bright, and I realized she'd been crying at some point. Thank you, she said. For what? For not giving up on us. For giving us chances to learn. For introducing us to those incredible young people tonight. She paused, gathering her words. I've been thinking about that first dinner a lot. About the woman I was that night. And I'm ashamed. Catherine. No, let me finish. I'm ashamed of how I treated you, yes, but more than that, I'm ashamed of the worldview that made that treatment feel justified. Like it was my right to evaluate you based on surface things. Like people only have value if they meet certain criteria. She took a breath. Those students tonight, I would have looked right past them 5 months ago. Written them off as not worth my time. And I would have missed out on meeting some of the most impressive people I've encountered in years. They're remarkable, I agreed. So are you. For seeing that. For caring about it enough to build a foundation around it. For making sure people like them have opportunities people like me take for granted. She reached out and took my hand. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know one dinner doesn't erase what happened. But I want you to know that you changed something in me that night. Something important. I squeezed her hand. I can see that. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing the work. Real work, not performance. I'm trying. Some days are easier than others. I catch myself making assumptions, having thoughts I'm not proud of. But now I notice them. I stop myself. I try to be better. That's all any of us can do. Richard approached as Catherine stepped away, his usual commanding presence somehow subdued. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. You already apologized. That was a lawyer's apology. Careful words, minimum liability. He almost smiled. This is different. I was wrong about you, but more than that, I was wrong about what matters. I've spent my entire life believing that certain markers, education, family, wealth, were reliable indicators of a person's worth. And you proved that not only wrong but backwards. The person with the most impressive credentials in that room was you, and I never saw it because I was too busy looking at the wrong things. We all make those mistakes sometimes. Maybe. But I've built a life around those mistakes. A worldview. And changing that at my age, he trailed off. It's uncomfortable. Like learning to walk again. Worth it, though? He looked over at Catherine, talking with Maria and exchanging phone numbers. Yeah. Worth it. A year after that first dinner, Daniel and I got engaged. The proposal was private, just the two of us on a beach in Maine, no performance or audience. But the engagement party was decidedly not private. Both families, friends from every phase of our lives, colleagues and scholarship students and people who'd shaped us into who we'd become. I stood in my parents' garden, fairy lights strung through the trees and champagne flowing freely, watching Richard and one of my scholarship recipients discuss economic policy with genuine enthusiasm. Watching Catherine introduce my mother to her book club friends with unfeigned warmth. Watching Daniel move through the crowd with easy grace, equally comfortable with everyone. You look satisfied, my father said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. I am. You did a good thing. With his parents. They did the good thing. I just provided the opportunity. You've always been too modest. He handed me a glass. Your mother and I are proud of you. Not for the foundation or the businesses or any of that, though we're proud of those too. But for this. For seeing people clearly and giving them chances to be better. That's a rarer gift than you think. I learned it from you. Maybe. But you've refined it into something all your own. He clinked his glass against mine. To you and Daniel. And to families that figure out how to grow. Later, as the party wound down and guests started to leave, Catherine found me near the garden gate. She was holding a small box, wrapped in simple paper. I wanted to give you this, she said. It's not much. Just something that belonged to my grandmother. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple gold bracelet, worn smooth with age, with a single charm, a small compass. She gave it to me when I graduated college, Catherine said. Told me it was to remind me to find my own direction, not just follow the path others laid out. I didn't really understand what she meant at the time. I thought I was supposed to follow the path, that deviating was failure. She paused. But you've taught me something different. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is question the map we've been given. Catherine, I can't accept this, please. It needs to go to someone who understands what it means. Someone who already knows how to find true north. She smiled. You're going to be my daughter soon. Let me give this to the woman who helped me find my way back to myself. I put on the bracelet, felt its weight settle on my wrist. It was perfect, not flashy or expensive, just meaningful. Real. Thank you, I said, and meant it completely. The party ended. Guests departed. Daniel and I helped with cleanup, carrying glasses and stacking chairs while our parents protested that we should leave it to the catering staff. But this felt right, staying to do the ordinary work after the celebration, keeping things grounded. Finally, it was just the two of us in the garden, fairy lights still twinkling overhead, the scent of roses heavy in the summer air. So, Daniel said, pulling me close. Was it everything you hoped for? Better, I admitted. A year ago, I wasn't sure we'd get here. I wasn't sure your parents could really change, or if the gap was too wide to bridge. But they did. They're trying to. That's what matters. I looked up at him, at this man who'd chosen me before he knew what I had, who'd stood beside me through uncomfortable truths and awkward dinners and the slow work of family reconciliation. You know what the best part is? What? We built this. Not on assumptions or expectations or what anyone thought we should be. But on honesty. On seeing each other clearly and choosing that reality instead of some comfortable fiction. Even when the honesty was uncomfortable. Especially then. I kissed him softly. That dinner, That first terrible dinner, it was the best thing that could have happened. Because it showed us all who we were and gave us the chance to become something better. You're saying my parents being awful to you was good. I'm saying their willingness to face that awfulness and grow from it was good. The difference matters. We stood there in the garden as the last lights winked out, the future stretching before us like an unwritten story. There would be challenges ahead, there always were. More uncomfortable conversations, more moments of growth and stumbling and figuring out how to be a family that honored both tradition and change. But we'd face them the same way we'd face that first dinner, with honesty, with clear eyes, with the understanding that real love wasn't about perfect harmony but about choosing each other through the discordant notes. I touched the compass bracelet on my wrist, felt its reassuring weight. True north wasn't about following someone else's map. It was about having the courage to chart your own course and the wisdom to adjust when you learned something new. I'd walked into Celestine a year ago acting poor and naive, letting people reveal themselves through their assumptions. I'd walked out having learned exactly what I needed to know, not just about Daniel's parents, but about the man I loved and his capacity for growth, for choosing what mattered over what was comfortable. Now, standing in this garden with fairy lights dying and a new chapter beginning, I realized something else. I hadn't just been testing his parents that night. I'd been testing myself too. Testing my own ability to sit with discomfort, to see beyond the surface, to believe that people could change even when they'd shown you their worst. We'd all passed, eventually. Not perfectly, growth never is, but genuinely. And that genuine, imperfect growth was worth more than any smooth performance could ever be. Ready to go home? Daniel asked, his arm around my waist. Almost. I took one last look at the garden, at the space where two families had come together and found unexpected common ground. Where assumptions had been challenged and walls had come down and something new had been built in their place. Then I turned to him and smiled. Okay. Now I'm ready. We walked to the car hand in hand, the compass bracelet catching the moonlight, our future spreading out before us like an open road. Not perfect. Not easy. But real, honest, and entirely ours. And that was more than enough.